Good day, everyone. We're going to be covering the Driving Standards Policy Review and Test. It's a PowerPoint slide. I apologize, it's going to be death by PowerPoint, but it's pretty straightforward stuff. This class will cover the contents of the Driving Standards Policy. This policy can be found on the Ninth Brain System and is subject to change. The Samaritan Vehicle Safety Policy communicates how Samaritan and its employees comply with applicable vehicle safety laws and regulations. In some cases, the provisions of this policy require Samaritan employees to meet higher performance standards than what may be established by federal or state regulation. This policy outlines the basic driving standards taught in emergency driver training course, but is not all-inclusive. The Samaritan vehicle driver is held responsible for the standards taught in EVOC driver training course or equivalent course. Please refer to EVOC driver training course for specific standards. In doing so, Samaritan will provide an enhanced margin of safety for employees, patients, and the community served. All departments that operate company vehicles are covered under this policy. Here's our regulatory requirements satisfied. You can Google those if you want more information on them. Alright, the policy is to comply with applicable federal, state, and local vehicle safety regulations and to set higher performance expectations for Samaritan employees to further enhance the safety of employees, patients, and the general public. To provide documented education and training to prepare Samaritan employees to safely operate company vehicles, and to designate the Director of Operations as having responsibility to effectively implement, monitor, and suggest improvements to this written program. To designate Safety and the Risk Manager as a technical advisor with the authority to make changes to this written program. Recognize the vehicle operator and partner have joint responsibility for the safe and professional operation of a company vehicle as outlined in this program. Based on joint responsibility, the operator and the partner may be subject to corrective action separately or in combination depending on the circumstances of each collision, policy infraction, or other safety-related incidents. And to conduct an investigation into each vehicle incident and to identify causal factors and to strategically select, carry out, and document corrective actions to reduce the likelihood of recurrence. To enforce and reinforce the elements of this written program consistently, and in case of discrepancies between the Samaritan policy and the state requirements, the stricter standard always applies. Only company employees and other individuals authorized by the company may drive company vehicles. Such employees must remain continuously insurable by Samaritan's insurance carrier requirements. The driver and partner are required to report vehicle collisions to their direct supervisor immediately. A collision is defined as any contact between a Samaritan vehicle and other vehicle, person, or object regardless of whether observable damage or injury occurred as a result. Samaritan employees who receive a citation while operating a company vehicle must immediately report the citation to their direct supervisor. It is a responsibility of all supervisors that receive reports of collisions or citations incurred by individuals that they supervise to report these incidents to the Director of Operations. Employees who operate company vehicles as part of their official jobs or duties shall report to their supervisors any conviction for the following offenses: vehicular homicide, using a vehicle to elude a law enforcement officer; hit and run collision; vehicular manslaughter; false report to a law enforcement officer; permitting an unlicensed driver to drive; any alcohol or drug related offenses including but not limited to driving while under the influence of alcohol or drugs; reckless driving; negligent driving; exceeding the speed limit by over 25 miles an hour; or driver license suspension. Samaritan employees must continuously practice defensive driving, the rules and circumstances and ideas of which are taught in EVOC or an equivalent driver training program. To a great extent, defensive driving means doing everything reasonably possible to avoid collisions, including anticipating hazards. There are two groups of employee drivers at Samaritan. The first is the trained emergency vehicle operator. The second is the non-emergency vehicle operator. While the following basic driving defensive rules are designed for the EVOC usage, they translate well to the non-emergency vehicle operator. Both employees in the front shall continuously scan 12 to 20 seconds ahead and around the Samaritan vehicle for potential hazards. Personal cell phones or any personal electronic device will not be used by the operator of the vehicle when it is in motion or by any crew member while responding to an emergency, unless it, of course, relates to the emergency you're responding. A good example of that would be if dispatch had to get a hold of you but was not able to reach you on radio. Samaritan drivers must establish and maintain a minimum of 4-second following distance behind the vehicle in front of them. The following distance should be increased when being, quote, tailgated by another motorist or when driving in nighttime conditions, inclement weather, fog, or have a patient on board, or other adverse driving conditions apply. Drivers shall maintain adequate side space cushions around the vehicle whenever maneuvering around or passing other vehicles, persons, or objects. To change lanes, drivers should check mirrors, engage a turn signal well in advance, and when clear to do so, make a 12-second gradual and smooth lane change. The right seat partner, when present, should help the driver by checking the right side blind spots. Performing U-turns is prohibited except on divided roadways where there is an open crossover. If there is not an open crossover, or it is not a divided roadway, consider going around the block, turning around in a nearby parking lot, or proceeding to the next intersection that allows for a safe U-turn via traffic controls. The driver shall use a crossover instead of crossing a concrete median. Using highway gravel crossover points is prohibited while operating a Samaritan unit. We find this is incredibly unsafe due to the fact that oncoming traffic is not looking for traffic merging from the median on the highway. During non-emergency mode driving, the posted speed limit must be observed. However, vehicle speed must never exceed that which is safe for conditions, regardless of posted speed limits. Employees must notify the Director of Operations of any medications they are taking that is not over the counter. Employees should not operate a vehicle while using medications that warn against driving or operating machinery. An exception can be requested if the company has provided a recent physician's note that indicates that it's safe for the employee to drive despite the use of these medications. Seatbelts in the cab must be worn by employees at all times while the vehicle is in motion. Seatbelts in the patient compartment must be worn by all occupants in the vehicle at all times unless providing patient care or vehicle backing procedures that prevent such use. Civilian passengers are to be assisted in and out of the vehicle with application of seatbelts. Infants and children, whether passengers or patients, are secured via seatbelts or other appropriate restraint devices. When at all possible, no child under the age of 12 shall be placed in the passenger front seat. Children under the age of 12 not requiring a safety restraint seat should be restrained in the captain's chair or in the rear of the unit if at all possible. Ambulance patients are secured on the stretcher. All stretcher restraints and belts, including the shoulder harness system, must be used. When the child's medical and physical conditions allow, he or she should be transported in a child safety seat or PD mate provided in all units. Children less than 1 year of age and all children weighing less than 20 pounds should be in a child safety seat or device. Children more than a year old and 20 pounds and up to 40 pounds should be placed in the child safety seat device. The child safety seats should be installed using the correct belt path for either a rear-facing seat or a forward-facing seat. Make certain that the child safety seat is installed so that it doesn't move more than an inch to side along the belt path. Harness straps should be snug and the harness clips should be at armpit level. Backing and tight quarters maneuvering. At the scene, every effort should be made to position the unit in a way it can pull forward. If backing the unit is required to get into this position, a ground guide must be utilized. While backing the vehicle, the backup alarm must be in continuous use. Now you may be asking, that sounds kind of redundant. Some of our vehicles do have a backup alarm cancel button. Backing with the spotter. Prior to backing, the driver's partner must exit the vehicle and check for hazards to the sides, behind, overhead, except when there is a patient on board. The driver shall not begin to move in reverse until a spotter is visible in the left mirror and indicates that the driver can begin backing. While moving in reverse, the driver is responsible for lowering the driver's side window, keeping his or her eyes focused on the left side mirror, the spotter, and for following instructions provided by the spotter. The spotter is responsible for identifying hazards behind, alongside, and overhead, and for providing the driver with clear instructions to avoid these hazards. If the spotter is not visible in the left side mirror, the driver shall stop backing the unit. Similarly, if the spotter needs to evaluate clearance in a blind spot, he or she must direct the driver to stop backing while such assessment is made. Backing with a patient on board. When in the patient compartment and not directly engaged in the provision of emergent patient care, the attendant should move as close to the rear doors as the patient's needs will allow, look out the rear windows, and verbally direct the driver until vehicle backing is complete. When the driver is alone, he or she must perform a walk around to check for hazards behind, alongside, and above the vehicle prior to backing. This step should be repeated as necessary to identify and avoid contact with hazards that cannot be seen while in the driver's seat. Anytime vehicle clearance is in doubt, or while moving in tight quarters or under overhangs, the use of a spotter or walk-arounds, if alone, is strongly suggested. Securing the vehicle. When arriving on scene, Samaritan vehicles should be parked out of the line of traffic and shielded from the rear by other vehicles or objects when possible. However, if the scene has not been secured prior to arrival and other traffic will pose a clear hazard to the Samaritan employees, patients, or other personnel, the Samaritan vehicle may be parked to shield the scene. Unless on an emergency call and no other reasonable parking is available on scene, employees should park in designated spaces or areas and shall not park in red curb fire zones, handicap spaces, areas marked as no parking zones, tow-away zones, or similar restricted locations. The driver is responsible for assuring the transmission is placed in park and the parking brake is fully engaged prior to exiting the driver's seat. If the vehicle be left unattended, the driver must assure the vehicle is locked or activate the anti-theft device if available. Emergency vehicle operations. The driver must continuously exercise due regard for the safety of others while requesting emergency right-of-way. This standard can only be met if the emergency warning devices are in use according to the provisions of this policy, and the Samaritan driver provides an adequate opportunity for others to safely yield the right-of-way. During emergency operations, drivers may exceed the posted speed limit by 10 miles an hour, subject to a maximum speed of 80 miles an hour. The posted speed limit must be followed in school zones, in construction zones, or other restricted zones. The posted speed limit must be followed as well, unless state and local law allow for exemptions, which in our case they do not. Regardless of circumstances or unit status, vehicles shall not be driven faster than safe speed for the current road, weather, and traffic conditions. Samaritan drivers shall restrict speed to 15 miles an hour if forced to pass stopped or slowed traffic using the shoulder. Under no circumstances shall a company vehicle pass in either direction a school bus that has stopped and activated its warning lights and or stop sign until the stop lights are deactivated and the stop sign is retracted, regardless of verbal or visual cues given by the bus driver. Under no circumstances shall a company vehicle be driven around a railway crossing arm that has been activated. During emergency operations, employees should avoid driving in the opposite direction of traffic, except when necessary to move the vehicle through a controlled intersection when the traffic is backed up, or maneuvering around to access an accident scene. The driver shall restrict speed to no more than 15 miles an hour when utilizing opposing traffic. In general, avoid traveling in an opposite lane of traffic, an opposing lane of traffic. My apologies. During emergency operations, when approaching the intersection controlled by a traffic control device, the operator must reduce speed to be able to stop the vehicle, if necessary to permit safe passage before entering the intersection. If the traffic control device is red or at a stop sign, the following procedures must be utilized. Make eye contact with and clear the left, then the right, and again to the left, and then the unit may enter the intersection. After securing the intersection, proceed through the intersection with less than 15 miles an hour, with due regard to clearing each lane individually prior to crossing it, paying special attention to shotgun lanes. When approaching a red light intersection that is fully blocked with stopped traffic and you are unable to clear the intersection, the operator shall take all necessary steps to prevent forcing a vehicle out into the intersection. All efforts should be made to pre-plan the approach to the intersection to prevent from becoming blocked in. Remember, if you ever push a vehicle out into a red light using your lights and sirens, and they are struck by another vehicle that did not yield the right of way, you are then liable for any damages and injuries that happened in that vehicle. During emergency operations, the driver must make a complete stop at the lane line if using a left lane turn to go straight or to turn right in front of traffic that is stopped at the lane line. After initial stop and open lane stops as required above, the driver shall restrict speed to 15 miles an hour until clear of the intersection during emergency operations. When operating a vehicle in emergency operations, the emergency lights shall be illuminated and the siren will be used. Only state-approved sirens shall be used, which are pretty much all of the Welland siren tones that we have. Emergency warning devices shall not be used in non-emergency response or non-emergency transport or routine driving situations. If any emergency warning device fails to operate normally, the vehicle must downgrade its response to a non-emergency status and notify dispatch. In an emergency response on approach of the traffic-controlled intersection or stop sign, the driver will change the pitch of the siren, usually to the more high-frequency sirens, like other than the wail. Ineligible drivers. You are considered an ineligible driver with Samaritan EMS if you have been convicted of any of the following: vehicular homicide, using a vehicle to elude a law enforcement officer; a hit-and-run collision; vehicular manslaughter; false report to a law enforcement officer; permitting an unlicensed driver to drive; any alcohol or drug-related offenses including, but not limited to, driving while under the influence of alcohol or drugs; reckless driving; negligent driving; exceeding the speed limit by over 25 miles an hour, or a driver's license suspension. Minimum driver eligibility standards for existing employees. Drivers are submitted for continued eligibility quarterly following the new employee criteria, meaning that your MVR is submitted quarterly to our insurance agency to validate that you are still an eligible driver. In some cases, employees will lose eligibility or will be watch listed, where the MVR is pulled monthly, meaning that you have committed an infraction that does not meet one of our standards, but it has put you on a list to make sure that you don't. Ongoing driver eligibility is determined through the continued insurability of the employee, which is determined by the insurance provider using both company information and the employee's MVR. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me. I'm the Director of Fleet and Logistics, Harrison Walter, at 405-625-9661, or you can email me at waltersh@SamaritanEMSOK.com. Thank you and have a good day.